Alright, it's a new day of wrenching, and I am going to get a few more things moving along. So, as you recall, the wiper motor rebuild was a fail, but there is a place. I'm going to try Fusic Automotive. They do Buicks, almost a lot of Buicks and Cadillacs and GMs, and they do a rebuilding service. If you send in your old wiper motor, they can get you another one. I don't know if they actually rebuild yours and send it back to you, or if they'll just send you another one. I would just as soon have another one. So anyway, we'll get that shipped off. It's already bought. I just need to wait till I'll probably get my original one, and then you send in a core for a little bit of money back, I believe. So that'll be good. The shop's a little bit of a disaster from all the other stuff we're doing, and today's the day that we have at it with this torque tube and differential. I'm excited that I think finally I might be able to do a little bit of work without being flat on my back under the car. So maybe this is a bright spot of wrenching today. But first, let's get cleaned up here a little bit around the shop. Thought I would make one more note about the torque ball from yesterday. I know this is a carryover from previous stuff, but this is the old outer retaining ring. And I've kind of been looking around on the inside there, and it's probably got some wear and some other things that have been going on with it, which would be expected, of course. But I think the takeaway for myself more is that you definitely want to install it, I think, about as loose as what you can get it while it'll seal, because it needs to move around quite a bit. That's a pretty generous sealing surface altogether around there. And I think if you install it I noticed the new kit instructions had a lighter pull on the torque ball with that dowel rod there than what the manual said. The old manual said to do about 30-35 pounds of pull on that dowel rod before it would budge, and the replacement says about 15, 5 to 15. That's really not very much weight at all. I think you want to have just seated enough so that it seals. And I think that if you ever did develop a drip, maybe years down the road, maybe even without pulling out the rear, I think there's enough looseness that you could actually pull back, disconnect, and disconnect the flange bolts, pull back a little bit on the propeller shaft, maybe slip this retaining ring here back just enough to see one of those spacers, and actually cut one of those paper shims out, then reseal it all again, and you would wind up gaining or tightening up, so to speak, a little bit. You know, it would just move forward just that much that maybe you can actually reseal your torque ball flange and get away with a little bit more mileage before you have to do something more like replacing it again. I'll try to remember that for myself maybe when the time comes. But anyway, this part gets discarded now. It's been replaced. So I'm spending some extra time here. I'm cleaning up this juncture here where the torque tube will eventually separate from the third member, which then connects to the rear axle differential housing, if I'm using the terminology correctly. Over here, right there, those little boogers right there, those are rivets, and those are kind of permanently, there's a bracket underneath there. Those rivets connect these strut rods, they call them, running along there, strut rods, to the torque tube, and it connects at that bracket right underneath at the torque tube there. It takes a 7/16 drill to drill those out. And the manual specifically tells you not to try to just air chisel, air hammer those off, because this is actually, it's really not very heavy metal, very thick metal. It's kind of bendable. You know, I've already kind of eyeballed these. It's been either run over something, or maybe when it supposedly had been in an accident of some time. So maybe one of these strut rods has been flexed a little bit. I can't tell. I may take some measurements off of it to see exactly how good those strut rods are for lining up. But anyway, the point being, if you try to chisel those off, you're gonna enlarge and widen, damage the hole that those strut rods have drilled in them already, and you'll kind of mess up your hole, maybe your alignment, I don't know. But they need to be drilled out. And then once they're drilled out, I'll wind up having to bolt those back in place. I won't have the ability to rivet those. Now, looking over here at the manual, they got a kind of an interesting section here. So they talk about the third member housing. They aren't replaceable, easily replaceable. They're not pre-drilled. If you ever had to replace your third housing, I don't know why you would, but if you ever did have to, you have to drill your own holes in it. And it goes to great detail talking about that and how you line up those strut rods, and you have to kind of get things right, because I can see those strut rods overall. When you're thinking about how does do your wheels and your rear axle align up with your torque tube, it matters quite a bit. So I'm gonna take a little extra time here, eyeballing that a little bit, making sure that from the measurements that it looks like things are correct. Then secondly, over here at the manual, so this is a section right here, and I'm not going to zoom in on it, but it says, in cases where oil seeps from the rear axle into the torque tube or propeller shaft and may pass a defective propeller shaft spline oil seal and enter the transmission, correction may be affected by installation of the pinion bearing oil seal. And they talk about, how it's furnished under another kit. All these other sections go into great detail talking about how to fit your oil seal, trial fit it, dent it, do some other things, and then put it on. So when I first read this, it seemed like a whole lot of business, including making a special tool. That's what all this is down here, to trial fit your seal into this block of wood, making sure that everything on the seal fits well on the sides, and then installing your seal. And this may be a little bit of overkill. If I'm very lucky, I can maybe just get this drilled, get that separated, undo those bolts, slide off this torque tube, and I may be looking at the oil seal that I'm wanting to replace. If not, then I may have to go ahead and start doing some more disassembly on the axle. So I won't know really until I'm in there looking at it, because the manual doesn't really talk about it in depth, like how to go from here to here to here. It just talks about the order of assembly if you were completely disassembling the rear axle. So let's cross fingers and hope that there are some parts there that are relatively accessible and more readily replaceable. So this riveted steel, it isn't too bad. I'm already all the way through here with this, smaller drill, and we'll just step our ways up to the final drill bit size, which I'm going to double check is 7/16. All right, pilot holes are through on both sides. Now we just start stepping up the drill bit, and I dip mine in some oil periodically to keep it cool and help it keep cutting better. But we're through with our pilot holes, and that's always the hard one. All right, very big pain in the rear getting that drilled out to 7/16, almost a ½ inch hole. But anyway, it's drilled out, and I will take this here, where is it at? This little cold chisel. I should be able to knock that off with a hammer without too much trouble, without damaging all the metal around it. All right, truth be told, what it actually meant by 7/16 was, if you're going to use a air chisel or hammer, at least drill it out to 7/16. Otherwise, if you get a new part, it says drill to a ½ inch. So it actually takes a ½ inch hole. I've been drilling forever, but I finally got that guy to loosen up there, and the other one will. Okay, that was horrible. But as you can see, the rivets fell off of both ends there. So I got both sides done. Now we can actually maybe move on to this part here, trying to get it disconnected. And then after that, see what it's like if we can actually wrangle this torque tube off of there, because you can see those ends there, they're kind of dented in. There might even be a few remnants of metal or something like that. I might have to knock that around a little bit in order to try to get the strut rods to separate from there. I can see that being a pain point. And I can definitely tell that this has never been taken apart before. You can say that for sure. All right, let's keep on going. All right, it's raining a bit outside, but I was able to hammer on those lightly just to kind of knock them apart and kind of get them going. I squirted some penetrating oil around there too, so later on when I get this, when I get these bolts over here loosened up, maybe we have a chance of actually separating this out somehow. I'm imagining that those are pretty grippy, pretty tight on there, so this may be a little bit more wrangling to try to get this to release nicely. All right, for giggles, while I was looking through the manual, said here you can see the gear axle ratio that you got on your car stamped on the underside of the axle. Of course, I never can see it because I always got the cup of the jack on it there. But I did some scrubbing, and I'm able to see right there the 3.9. And that is the pretty much the standard axle ratio that you get on your Roadmaster. There was an option, it looks like. Over here you could have gotten 3.6 to 1. But fortunately I got the 3.9 because I certainly wouldn't want to get better fuel economy or anything like that. Har, har, har. Anyway. So it's got a little stronger rear axle there, but then again it's a heavier car. Looks like the specials and the other lighter cars got a lot of times got a 3.6 rear axle. And oh, that's interesting. If you have a synchro mesh, not a Dynaflow, but a synchro mesh, you got a 4.1 rear axle a lot of times. But anyway, those are your two options there for the Roadmaster for that year, the 3.6 to 1 or the 3.9 to 1, and I got a 3.9. This is just a mental note to myself that when you do that bottom bolt there, you got to remember to put that bracket on there. That was where one of the parking brake cable retaining springs hooked around on there on the bottom. So don't forget to put that on when you're reassembling all your stuff, Dell. So here's an exploded view of the axle and the torque tube coming up from it. And where I've just taken all the bolts out from is right here. So I'm trying to decide if there's anything else that I'm supposed to work on before I start working this over. Now, obviously there's a spline shaft here. I'm a little concerned because of that word pin. So I don't know if that's simply a pin connection to keep the propeller shaft in place, or if there's something else I need to be concerned about. So, and then there is a gasket, I'm sure, there between the parts that I'm looking to separate. There's a nut, and underneath it, I believe there is the seal that they talk very much about right here, making sure that that doesn't leak. So let's see what winds up happening here. I just can't quite see it yet. I don't know if this whole assembly is going to come out with propeller shaft as well, or if it'll just be the torque tube sliding off of it, but I think there's no way to do this other than try. There are, it says right here, also some more lock, nut, and screw assembly right here. There's actually looks like to be two of them. Deeper in this, what they call third member housing. I guess this would all be considered third member. But anyway, let's start pulling apart and see what happens. So I'll try to describe this. There's just enough of a lip on the underside of this bracket, right between here and this brake line. There's just a little bitty gap right there, just enough for me to get the end of this slide hammer which has been quite valuable. Thank you, Slide Hammer, and the generous donor of the Slide Hammer, my dad. I was able to knock it back and actually started to walk back from this bracket, and you can see that the tube here has actually started to separate. I put a little block of wood under here just because I just wanted to support it a little bit here. I'm a little nervous because I don't know what I'm going to see when I keep going with this here, but I'm going to see if I can just kind of keep gently tapping back or holding or wiggling back and move this off kind of careful, just in case something comes apart and I want to see how it went together. So as I peek down into here and as I lift and wiggle, I can see that it looks like this is purely a tube sliding away. I'm going to keep hammering away gently on this, hammering gently, to see if I can keep walking this back. Again, these that's a kind of a pinched connection there. When it first broke away, I could see a puff of rust smoke kind of break off of that there. So it's just kind of a binding point. So it's kind of a hard balance here between not wanting to hit too hard, but it just doesn't look like, at least initially, like I've got anything in here. I'm kind of looking through that slit, if you can see down in there. I don't think there's anything there that is going to stop me from continuing to carry this torque tube back a ways here. All right, we're much more far along here. Make a special note here. There is this little bracket right down here was kind of a pain because there's a brake line right down there that it was trying to snag up on, but I just bent that brake line down a little bit and passed it. So this is free. You can see that this is actually completely free and over. All right. Let's see what we got here on the other end. I put something to protect the propeller shaft over here, but yeah, okay. So that's gone. The propeller spline shaft has disappeared back further into here. Now I'm not exactly keen on completely removing the torque tube if I don't have to, because I do want to keep that propeller shaft nice and clean and all these parts here from getting dirty. So that looks like a pin, a retaining pin right there. Let's get in on this here a little bit. And what else do we got going on here? Well, that's an interesting little nut. Look at that. It's been hammered, chiseled, dented in. Don't know if that was done. Yeah, that's how they retain that sucker, so that it wouldn't go anywhere. Okay. So, seal. Seal. Where's the seal? So there is no gasket material on this. Now, sorry if I play around with my light here for a little bit, I gotta hold this. Alright. That's metal, solid metal. In here, oh, come on down the light. Sorry, everybody. I'm gonna have to turn the brightness down just a little bit here. Okay. There is a seal right there. And then deeper down in there, there may be yet again another seal behind that nut there that you I would have to play around with that. I think this seal is not the one that has anything to do with fluid leaking into the torque tube. I don't think. Because I think it would all be coming in from here. Somehow going past this, I suppose. Think about this. I'm going to look at this diagram a little bit longer here too. But anyway, I may have to drive this pin out. I may have to remove the shaft. I may have to undent that by driving some type of a wedge underneath there, back that screw off, that nut off, and see if there's a seal under there yet again. Alright, more to contemplate. I'm going to go look at my diagrams a little further before we do anything too rash. So as I read through the manual here, once you have your pinion seal made and fitted in the way you like it and it's been ready to go, when the seal's been properly fitted into the carrier bore, place it on the pinion bearing lock nut with the inner leather seal pointing away from the hex nut. And then they talk about the rest of the assembly that is done there. So looking over here, I'm pretty sure that what's going to happen is I will probably have to file off that pin head there and drive that out so that I can slide the propeller shaft off of this spline, undent that nut right there. I mean, it's just kind of there. It's not on real tight. I can wiggle that by hand. And maybe that's part of the problem. Not really sure. Doesn't really say about how. I'll have to look on how tight those go on before you dent them. I may even need to get a replacement nut since that one's been dented. But I think if this propeller shaft is off, then I'll be able to slip a new seal on there. I don't think. I'm going to check. Well, I'll check one more time. I don't think you can just simply remove this nut and slide it back and expect any of this to come back with it. I think this spline shaft end is just a continuation of more and more and more back into the differential. That would make the most sense to me. And I'll look at the rest of that there to see if indeed I need to do that. Now I'll check also, I don't know if by loosening these guys up you can take more of the assembly out rather than having to undrive that pin there. I don't want to create more trouble than what I have just by taking more out than what is necessary. So back to the manual. Well, here's more interesting reading here. When you do go to install your bearing lock nut with the thin side towards the spline, while gripping the splined end of the pinion in a vise, tighten that nut to a minimum of 150 foot-pounds of torque. The nut must hold the bearing tight against the shoulder on the pinion. They warn not to try to grip those pinion teeth sticking out of there in a vise, whether you're using soft jaw vise or not. And then also it says here, when assembling the pinion and the propeller shaft together, that spline joint is supposed to be sealed to prevent lubricant from entering the propeller shaft. So there's, the torque tube component of it where fluid can go into the torque tube, but then you could also have a leak down into your propeller shaft as well. You're supposed to put a little bit of press tight sealer and aluminum based plastic material. Okay. Permatex or white lead may be substituted, but these are not as efficient. You dip the whole end of the pinion into the sealer and then press it into place. The pinion can't be loose, and then you install a new coupling pin and solidly rivet both ends. So this kind of illuminates a little bit more to me about some different things going on here. Most likely I should not be able to just take that nut and spin it there with my fingers. The oil seal is, I don't think I can see it, or maybe, you know, it's back behind there. I don't think that what is that? Is that, maybe that is the seal. That could be the seal right there. But regardless, this is going to have to come apart to a certain degree for me to ever try to slip on a new seal around there. So there's just no way around it. So I'm going to get some food in me, and then we'll think about taking this propeller shaft off of here and undenting that nut and screwing it off, and then looking at the rest of the assembly there to get to that seal. So with renewed vim and vigor, I have filed the head off of that rivet, which I'm about to drive through there, and then remove the shaft. So you can see right there on the top, I just got out, I did this old school, went ahead and just, oops, lost everybody here. Got out a file, rounded off the head of that pin, got a punch, and I've got it almost completely driven out now. I'm just going to knock out the rest of the way. Let's see if we can't get this all separated here. So by whacking a board on the lip that I have there on the propeller shaft, I am making some headway. If you can look down there, you'll see where that's starting to come off there. I knew when they said that it had been sealed up against that spline shaft, that this was not going to be a easy process. And for anybody trying to take those off, you can't be too gentle with this. You really got to give them a really, really, really hard whack. But it's starting to go. It's starting to go. So let's knock it off there and finish this. So there it is. I got it knocked off that spline there. And I'm going to show you this board here, how splintered it is and everything like that. And I used one of my heavier hammers there. This was not a delicate process. These were very, very hard whacks. I will tell you, though, that it seemed like I was binding up at one point in time and wasn't getting anywhere. It's important to keep that torque tube lined up as much as you can while you're knocking it off of that shaft, just so that it makes it a little bit easier for it to slip off. But anyway, so it's off. Pin is out. Shaft is knocked off. I'm going to pick up that torque tube and put it aside somewhere, and then we'll get to looking at this nut and seal assembly on the inside there. Alright, I had to roll the wheels a little bit so the whole pinion's spun a little bit here. But what I'll wind up doing is, you can just see it right there. Right there is where that nut gets deformed in. I'm going to... They actually had a name in the manual for the chisel. I'll have to find the name of that chisel there. But anyway, I'm going to stick something in there and undent that nut so that it'll come off of there, and then twist that nut off of there. And then see what comes off next. It's not going to show up very good in here, but I'm just going to let you know that I did mark that side of the rod where that hole is. So that, and I put another mark right there. It's very small to see, but there is a little divot right there, just so that I know that those are the holes to line up. They recommend that you put that propeller shaft back onto that spline in the same relative orientation, which I believe is probably a good idea. For those of you wanting to know, the name of the chisel that I'm supposed to put in there is a cape chisel. So everyone go get your cape chisel to knock that back mark. Knock that dent in that nut back out. Good grief. I'll just have to find something that fits. I've already seen on the internet that you can buy another one of these nuts. I hated having to do it, but I don't have a wrench big enough to get this off. And I really didn't like the way that was dented in the first time, and I don't think I'll be able to get it to line up correctly the second time to redent, so I'll just wind up getting another nut. But anyway, this dude's off. Well, as I sit and stare at this longer, I tend to get a little bit more and more confused, because what I'm seeing is what that says is shield number, blah, blah, blah. That's a bearing shield. Literally right through there. Do you see that? Hold on. I'll see if I can keep it from messing up that shot. I'm just going to tell you that's a ball bearing. It's a ball bearing right there. Those are the bearings. I see naked bearings. I see probably part of the race for the bearings. I see a bearing shield around it. I've got this spindle nut here that, you know, can crank down there and put a lot of pressure and preload those bearings. Where is the entire oil seal part that is supposed to be, I think, in this cavity? I'm wondering if it's just gone. I don't know what it was made of or what it was like. There's a... Let me get this nut out of the way. Hold on. So the nut gets replaced. You get a new nut and a new seal. Typically, when you get new seals, you get a new nut. There's maybe just a little bit of metal right around that periphery right there. That looks more like the casting. That doesn't look like a seal or something that was pressed in. I'm wondering if I'm just completely missing the entire seal that it just degraded and went away. I don't know. I think what I need to do is order a new seal and see what I get when it comes in. Unfortunately, the pictures when I've looked at seals or pinion seals, they don't have images for them. And when I look in the book, it doesn't make any sense either, because it looks like right past here, kind of around or underneath that nut, there's supposed to be a seal. This is the diagram. You know, you got on this end here is your propeller shaft, a spindle nut, and in this big cavity right there it says oil seal right there in front of the ball bearings. And there's even the mention of here's the bearing shield coming around, the little arrow right in front of there. Where's the seal? Maybe that's my problem. It's just gone. Okay. I think what I'm going to do is get a new nut, a new seal, and see what shows up. And then maybe that will illuminate things more. Here's a picture of this ginormous seal that's supposed to be there with a lot of information on how to properly fit it and to make sure it's in there good and this, that, and the other. And I don't see it. Maybe that's what's perplexing me, is I'm looking for something that isn't even there. All right, well, let's order a new set of seals and a new spindle nut, because that one's kind of destroyed. I may need to get a bigger crescent wrench, or I need to get a bigger wrench to get on that. But anyway, I think that's about all I can do for today. So the mystery just kind of keeps going. I think I'll know more actually when I get my new seals. I think much will be explained.